Hi, welcome to A New Afrikan, where we tell our stories without changing the narrative. While looking at the future with optimism, we also aspire to remain relevant in our present times.
Hello and welcome to our podcast, A New Afrikan, episode number 3. With me today is Mani. Hello, Mani.
Hey, Mwaba, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And to my left here, I've got Dr. Molapo Selepe, who is the author of the 3-book series that we talk about on this podcast. Welcome, Dr. Molapo.
Hi, Mwaba. Good to see you.
Great to see you too. Yes, so today I'm very, very excited to introduce our topic of discussion today, which is African privilege. Now, Kwame Nkrumah started this conversation for us so far back, many years ago. He said, I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. What a privilege, what an honor to be an African.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll delve into what that statement means because it is a very loaded statement. I know when I was reading the book, I was sort of contemplating on that quote, and I was trying to understand what Africa really, being Africa born in you, meant for me. And as we go through the chapter, I think the author does a good job of explaining what that is. But I want to start off, I suppose, from the story where, and we'll get into this, but I was born free, essentially. Born in Zimbabwe. I was born after 1980, therefore born free. So for me, I would like to think I've always had a sense of respect and love for Africa, and I've always sort of taken it not for granted that I was, and I've always seen it as a privilege to be in a beautiful country, like a beautiful continent like Africa, especially Zimbabwe. What do you think is the difference between African privilege and, say, black privilege?
Because it gets confused, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
People don't often understand what the difference is between those two.
Yeah, I mean, there's a subtle difference. Effectively, it's just emphasizing that it's not really a racial thing. So Africa refers to the continent, but a continent more than just the pigmentation of your skin, or whether you were born in the continent or not. Mind you, there's many people of African descent who were born outside Africa. They're still Africans. And there are people who somewhat, taking into consideration Nkrumah's statement, who Africa was born in them. And so that African privilege speaks to the essence of who you are as a person, transcending your color. So I think we need to make it clear that we're not talking about black privilege. We're not talking about how privileged you are because your skin is darker. You can't get melanin. You can't get melanoma and stuff like that. Or you don't get cold easily.
Or you don't burn when you walk in the sun.
Not about that. I feel like I burn.
I've taken pictures of me sporting a tan after I've had a walk in the morning.
Wow.
I know. I can't show it to you, but it's there. It's there somewhere.
So no, African privilege is deeper.
Yep.
And I'm glad that we're talking about that. Mind you, it's my most favorite chapter in these books.
I think it might be mine too.
I'm looking forward to the treat.
Yeah, excellent. Now, there is a girl you mention in the book who was born with a birthmark, a very, very distinct birthmark. And this birthmark is actually the map of Africa to the left of her face. I'll let you say her name because I want to make sure that I practice for when I meet her one day. I hope that we're going to have her on this show and actually talk to her live. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Be good.
It will be amazing indeed.
She got bullied because she had the map of Africa on the left of her face. Literally, this is a birthmark. And I want you to talk about a little bit about her. And
her
what
story
that
is
meant
quite
for her.
remarkable, really. Kgothatso Dithebe is her name. Kgothatso.
Say that 3 times, people. I dare you.
Kgothatso Dithebe.
Kgothatso Dithebe. She's very pretty.
Yeah.
She was born in 1995 in Pretoria, it's funny because she was born with this distinct, birthmark.
Yeah.
Some people think it's vitiligo. It's not vitiligo. So vitiligo, you actually have to have depigmentation, but that is sort of on both sides of your face.
Your face,
and that is really affecting both sides of your body. So it's not just one spot. So she has this depigmentation on her face, but it's in it's take the whole part of her left cheek, and affecting part of her eye, that area. But it's in a form of the continent, the
Africa, the map of Africa.
Her story is really touching because children, when she was growing up, she was really bullied around this feature that she has. And you would think that a child would feel, bullied and get demoralized, and, it will dent their confidence and that type of a thing. But in Kgothatso's case, it actually worked the other way around.
She rose above it.
She rose above it.
Yeah.
And she saw it as a privilege to actually have, that mark. It's almost like you come with, a stamp on your face that, you are an African, nobody will mistake it otherwise. And, it's very interesting because those who were mocking her, where like many of us, how we look at ourselves, ever so lowly, and the inferiority complex you get around Africa, because of all the prejudices that we have about Africa. It's impoverished. There's poor leadership. There is infrastructural problems, and there's wars and all these sorts of things. So when imagine making mockery that hey, you're Africa, it's just like our boys who play football in Europe, and people throw banana peels on them, and that type of. So there's that prejudice that if you are African, that you are disadvantaged. And it was very interesting that Kgothatso actually saw it the other way around.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about where that actually originates from, because I think a lot of us as Africans, and I speak for myself, and I'm sure I'm speaking for many, that there is just something about some sort of inferiority complex that comes on us. I wouldn't like to think that was something we were born with, but something that we rather, picked up along the way.
Yes.
And I know that throughout this podcast, we talk a lot about some of, the historical colonialisms and the effects of that and the impacts that has, because there were children in her school who were mocking her. How did they know so much bad about Africa? They were young children. And so that speaks to how far, reaching this issue of colonialism really goes.
It's deep-rooted, it's deep-rooted. I don't know if you know the concept of human things versus human beings. There is a whole philosophy around that in terms of, the way we have been objectivized and being so violated to a point where we don't see ourselves as humans any longer. A lack of sense of dignity. Over time, you actually see yourself as subhuman.
Yeah, which is tragedy.
Tragedy. And it's so painful, Mwaba, because that, I think I alluded to this last week, that it actually begin to run in the DNA, because your DNA takes the memory of what your ancestors used to were subjected to and all that. So that's how it begin to run in our systems, in our culture. That people are born into a system where people have been made to feel small. They've been violated, and over time, people start to see themselves that way.
And it's interesting because that's very true. And I mean, going back to Kgothatso, is that Kgothatso
Dithebe.
you know, and I'm going to quote a quote that she did: that in a world where you can be anything, be yourself. And I think that's a very powerful quote. Especially, I would say, for a lot of, you know, she's born in 95. She's in her 20s. She's pretty young. And a lot of young people, I think, you know, there's that identity crisis at the moment where, you know, even now so more so with social media and everything where, you know, people are struggling or, you know, sort of losing their identity in terms of who they are. And so there is that call of just embracing yourself fully. Like you can acclimatize, like, you know, as you know, us here, we are filming this podcast in Perth in Australia. We've moved here. We can acclimatize the culture in terms of, you know, fitting in, but that doesn't mean we should change the Africanness in us. So that quote is absolutely amazing. I mean, what are you, when you read that?
Yeah, it's too powerful, man. I mean, the insight is just incredible because it is true. You know, not only can we become anything, we are made to be anything we want to be.
Absolutely.
And it's such a beautiful insight for her to appreciate that, you know, every human being on earth has got the potential to be whatever they want to be. But don't lose yourself in the process.
Absolutely.
Hence her, assertion that be yourself.
Absolutely.
She was 19 when she defied all odds, everything that she was told she wasn't, and she ended up winning Miss Africa in 2017, Miss South Africa in 2017. That is remarkable. That is just tenacity that, you know.
She was a runner-up. But she was competing with, you know, the big girls like Zozibini, you know, who became Miss Universe. But no, she's up there, and she's one of the most recognized African models now.
And she exposed her entire birthmark with pride.
With pride.
Yeah,
you know?
that was remarkable. That was really awesome.
I mean, it speaks to, if somebody can stand like that, you know, the courage of one person is amazing how far it can go.
Absolutely.
She's literally changing the landscape and contributing to, you know, the general universal perception of ourselves. You know, if she, you know, assess to see herself this way, certainly the next generation will see nothing wrong with being African.
There is something to be said. I know I was reading an article way back that just came to me just now. You know, when you're fully yourself and you absolutely accept yourself for who you are, then you don't give anyone else the opportunity to tell you otherwise or to treat you in any other way because you've fully accepted who you are as a person. So then if someone tells you you are, you know, you are ugly or whatever, you're like, well, you know, it's like, bounces off because I fully come to the acceptance and knowledge of who I am as a person. And I know my identity. And so it comes to, you know, to that African identity. If you know fully that this is who I am and that is the ground for which you stand on, and you are unmoved by the winds and, you know, waves that comes through. You stand firm. You know.
You know, it's remarkable you should say that, really, because what we're going to talk about today, or what we're talking about, really, we are not trying to change the quality or the value of a human being.
No.
Every human being on planet Earth have got infinite, invaluable value.
Absolutely.
And potential.
You know, there's nothing we can do to change that. You know, what we are doing today is just to change the perception and make people perception to marry with the value of who they are. So we are introducing you to yourself.
That's great. And, you know, it's so interesting. When I was thinking about Kgothatso and what she went through, if she, and this speaks to me as a mom today, and raising a child in a you know, foreign country, and what information am I passing on? What sort of education in terms of where we come from and the value of his Africanness? Now, I wondered if those kids that were bullying Kgothatso, if they knew what it meant to be African, if they knew what kind of, privilege it is that they are born out of.
Yes.
Or if they even had information like what we've talked about in the last couple of episodes about the first ever university in the world was in Africa. Do you reckon that could have changed the way they thought about Africa and what a privilege it was that somebody was actually born with a map of Africa on their face?
What a privilege, First thing that strikes me is that Africa is the only continent that is centered in the core of the planet.
Yeah.
Other parts of the world, other continents are effectively just drifting. And Africa is the only continent that divides the world into four. Or for all the four quadrants of the earth are found in Africa, which you can't find in other continents. It goes to show that Africa is central to the planet. The first human being to be born in this planet or to be created in this world was in Africa. Evidence shows us that all humanity comes from Africa. So you can say that all accumulative knowledge of mankind can be traced back from Africa. And it's just phenomenal if you look at human resources. I mean, Africa has got the largest population of young people in the world.
Yeah.
That's just something extraordinary.
Oh yeah.
You have human resources, not natural resources. Which is in trillions. I think the worth of African natural resources is about $60 trillion. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
So we're sitting on wealth in terms of human resources and natural resources.
Yeah.
There has been outside interventions or disruptions that have led to what we term as poverty in Africa or this stability in Africa. But in essence, if Africa was given enough attention, it's amazing, what we can.
We could all be made wealthy if we just, dug into all the African wealth.
Certainly.
Every single human being in the world would be wealthy, right?
Certainly.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, but to be honest as well, that really did when I was reading this part of the book, it did really, whilst I obviously do not condone bullying of any sort and everything else, I did feel for the kids that were using the map and everything else as a derogatory term. But I think what I got here, and you describe it beautifully in terms of, and you've just discussed it right now, the multi-trillion-dollar mineral deposits, the vast array of flora and fauna, the incredible landscape, and all the animals and all that stuff. And there's even a quote here from Wayne Dyer that says, all you ever need, you already have Africa. Africa is endowed with so much, it is impossible to quantify.
Yeah.
But I suppose the issue that we can all, being from the continent ourselves, is that privilege, you can only realize your privilege if you experience privilege, and we can attest that, there's only a few of Africans within the continent that probably have the privilege of actually experiencing, even being able to travel within your own country to see all these natural resources. And I think that's the sad part. And hopefully, it's an issue, I suppose, we need to discuss and broader, and I know there's bigger issues. And I mean, we're going to go to Ubuntu, which is another, I feel like it's a good arch in terms of solution to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit, it is a bit sad that I think the reason why people don't see it as a privilege is just because it's not really experienced to a level. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you see how many people, even us, it talks to even us having left the continent. we live in the continent in varying degrees, isn't it?
Exactly.
But it all talks to economic migration.
Yeah.
We don't see so many opportunities over there. So we think that the grass is greener on the other side. And look, there are people who are able to migrate nicely like we are.
Yeah.
But there are kids who are, so desperate that they travel on boats, and some die in the seas and all sorts of things.
On a plane recently, there was a guy from, quote me here, it was either Uganda or Kenya, literally was in the wing, of the plane. Yeah. And he somehow managed to survive that, and this is the desperation, and all the medical people are saying we have no idea how he managed to survive in those degrees and everything. But, it goes to the desperation you were talking about in terms of leaving. Yeah.
We all leave Africa thinking that we are going to find riches and wealth and all these wonderful shiny things where we're going.
Exactly.
Not realizing that we're actually leaving
it
deposits right behind us.
It's a perception thing. I think Mani has hit the nail on the head there by saying, look, it's a question of our experience. Because we don't experience it, we think it's not there.
That's it.
And so as New African, one of my biggest tasks is to really try to, I'm going to dedicate my life to try to make people appreciate that there's a way that you can experience what it means to be an African.
And we're going to talk about that in the next half. This is it's going to peak. So stay tuned, keep with us, and we'll talk about all those things and more.
Yeah. See you soon.
Welcome back, guys. As you can see, we're having a great discussion. So the first half, we're talking about African privilege and what that means, and the difference between African and Black privilege. We spoke about whether or not, people do we really understand as Africans, or anyone really, the privilege that we have being African or identifying as African, or having, as the president, former President Kwame Nkrumah quoted, "I am an African not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me." So this can relate to anyone listening. You don't have to be born in Africa, but Africa can be born in you for a multiple of reasons, to which we'll get into. The one that I want to ask you is, within your book, you ask this question, and I've been sort of thinking for myself, and I won't lie, I haven't really landed on a answer yet, but I'd like to think, hopefully, as you're writing these books, by book 3, you knew at least the answer.
In and out.
So you kind of pose a question and say, ask yourself what it means for Africa to be born in you. What does it mean for you for Africa to be born in you, Molapo?
Ooh, man, Africa is really the essence of humanity. So it is understanding exactly why we are here as human beings. All human beings come from Africa. And we have got sets of values which are inherent in us as humanity. And it's difficult because sometimes we write these things down and, we want to see them as doctrines. But there are certain human values which are written deep down in human heart. For instance, kindness.
Yes.
Love.
Yes.
Yes.
Seeing dignity in another human being.
Yes.
So these are unwritten values
Yes.
of humanity. And Africa embraces that.
Absolutely.
So if it deep down in your heart, you begin to see the value of all human beings, irrespective of where you come from, irrespective of how you look, how short, how tall, how big, you have come close to appreciating what it means to have Africa born in you.
Oh, powerful.
And if I was to go to something which is very crucial, and it will set a tone for our discussion, it is this concept of mitochondrial Eve. Have you guys heard of mitochondrial Eve?
No.
So,
Please do tell.
Don't hold back now.
I feel like this is now the doctor talking to
Yes,
us.
yes, absolutely.
So mitochondrial Eve is very interesting, really, because human DNA, as you know, that inside a human cell, you have the center, which is the nucleus. Inside that nucleus resides the human DNA, which is really a code that tells the whole system how money needs to look like, how his system needs to, function. That whether you'll have brown eyes or blue eyes.
Which one are you?
Brown always. The dominant gene, brown.
So
I've seen an African baby with blue eyes, strikingly blue eyes.
Is it?
Maybe the doctor can tell us how that happened.
wow. So that's there's a type of DNA that's called the diploid DNA. So basically, it means that your DNA is in a double strand, and then you can have a single strand of DNA. That's called haploid. So when you have a diploid DNA, it means that you have all the 46 human chromosomes. And then if it's haploid, then you have half of those. So if you look at, for instance, sperm, it will have 23 chromosomes. They meet with a female ovum with 23 chromosomes. And then when they meet, they form a new being or a new cell with 46 chromosomes. Now, there's a part of human DNA which is not in the nucleus.
Right.
It is in the cytoplasm, which is just inside the cell, but just outside, not in
Floating
the center.
around?
It's floating around.
Right.
And that part is called mitochondrium. So we're beginning to understand something powerful about the mitochondrion. That it harbors with it human DNA as well. But it is only transferred from mother to baby. So it cannot go on the paternal side. It goes mainly on the maternal side.
Power to the women. Is that when I say that?
Yes,
You already did.
You got it. And that's why we call it the motherland. If you wanted to know why.
Oh,
so
great.
let me tell you.
Getting good. I might start writing some notes or a book.
Let me tell you something amazing. There was a sequencing of human DNA, especially this mitochondrial DNA, which was done by a lady called Louise Kahn in 1987, and that was the idea to try to trace as far back as we can the first common ancestor of humankind, going back from the female side. And that would be called our mother. So that mother was called mitochondrial Eve, or the haploeve.
Right.
You won't believe that haploeve, or that mitochondrial Eve, which is the common mother to all humankind, which dates back about 10,000 years, 200,000 years back. She was in Africa. And she was in Botswana, of all places. Hey,
Oh, wow.
Botswana. You guys, you carry our oldest great grandmother.
Is it Tswana?
Not far from you,
They are neighbors, so
Not
yes.
far from me either.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I'm starting to feel very privileged right now.
So that is phenomenal, really, because we're beginning to understand that there is something amazing about what the mitochondrial DNA does in terms of human function. In fact, the mitochondrial DNA is so much responsible to what we call the human thought. So if you're asking yourself, but how is it possible? Where does the thought come from? We need to do a little bit more study about the haplo or the mitochondrial DNA, because that's the understanding is that could be the origin of human thought.
Human thought, wow.
And this is
woman.
and this is like us defining the inner person, really. And I know you touched on that humanity in terms of the threads that put us together in what it means to be having Africa born in you. And you then speak of this term Ubuntu. Do you want to tell us defined in your understanding? Because I know you have defined, and I have my personal favorites in terms of how it related to me personally when I was reading the book. But I would like to hear your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, Ubuntu is a Nguni or Zulu terminology, which means humanness or humanity. Basically, in essence, it is understanding that there is a value in every human being.
Yeah.
So I am because you are. So you begin to appreciate that that which I don't understand, which is part of my psyche, that makes me aware, that makes me to exist, makes me to be Malapo.
Yeah.
It is the same source of life that lives in you, Moab.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so there is that innate African understanding that I cannot begin to disrespect you, knowing that the source of life that lives in me also lives in you.
Knowing that I am because we are.
Yes.
That's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
It also reminds me of another African value. And I know that this may be a bit foreign to, other parts of the world. But this concept of extended family, the extended family culture, it is something that none of us gets taught in school in Africa or anything like that. It's just something that you're born with. You're born into an extended family. You're part of that extended family. And that forms the foundation of our existence, really, right? So that is another value of Ubuntu. In my language, one of my Zambian languages, one of the 73 Bemba, it's called, I would call you Umuntu, meaning you're a person, a single person. Umuntu, so you are a Muntu. He is a Muntu, I am a Muntu. But together we are Abantu, which is another version of Ubuntu. And that defines who we are. It's a very reason why we never ever try to leave anyone behind.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a lot of issues with regards to when we're talking about interracial relationships and things like that, where if the boyfriend or the husband or the wife is from a different culture, and the other one is from Africa, and then the Africanness in us, the Ubuntu in us, tries to gather everyone, your sisters, your brothers, you want to bring them together. If you have achieved anything, you want to share that. That's the extended family concept that makes us Abantu or Ubuntu.
It's amazing because those traditional values is what actually has made us so grounded.
Yeah.
I mean, you might see in recent years or in recent generations, there has been this really perhaps unintended or maybe a contradiction where we have become victims to greed as such.
Yeah.
But if you look at what can actually offset human greed, it is those traditional values that we have in Africa. Beginning at the beginning of 1800s, or let's say end of the 18th century, we started to see the beginning or the eruption of what we now call capitalism.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, the essence of capitalism really, and that's why it's called the head, or capital refers to the head. Somewhat the values of capitalism have somewhat festered selfishness,
Yes,
or
definitely.
we become so self-centered, in a way. And there is also this concept of novelty, always wanting something new, always wanting something better. What's the latest? And you see, that's how capitalism has spiraled out of control, because we're always wanting the latest model or the latest version of any gadget, that type of a thing. And what is it in it for me? And as a result, it has led us to this sort of society that we have now, where people can spend so much money just to try to quench that.
Which never gets quenched, by the way.
No. It never gets quenched.
You have said here in your book, this is a story about us being allowed, or us and allowing ourselves to be persuaded to spend money we don't have on things we don't need, to create impressions that won't last on people we don't care about. Right? So that is therefore the objective of consumerism. And it's when we are talking about Africanness or Ubuntu or the extended family concept, it's never about things, is it? It's about people. So when I want to share with someone. When I have money, I want to make sure that the person I can extend a hand to and help, rather than go and buy another pair of shoes, another pair of, whatever, and another car, and more houses, and all these things.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we're neglecting our humanness. We're neglecting the very essence of Ubuntu.
Absolutely,
isn't it?
yeah, and to be clear as well, the quote was from Tim Jackson, who was a great TED talk that is absolutely feeds into this very much well. And I think you even said to him, he's an example of someone who I suppose lives the Ubuntu philosophy. Really,
exactly. Again, the concept of a new African, an African privilege, that it goes beyond, or it transcends color. Really, it is about all humans understanding the power of listening to that small still voice inside you.
Absolutely.
When it calls you or draws you deep to the human values. He makes a very interesting analogy or understanding of the the equation between novelty and tradition.
Yes.
So Ubuntu, for instance, on one hand, it will be really focusing on tradition, traditional values.
Yeah.
Whereas capitalism or consumerism will be mainly about new things, or latest things, or what we call novelty. So novelty versus tradition.
Absolutely.
It's important that we don't become so, obsessed with tradition that we don't see the need to be versatile and to embrace new things. So technology is important, but it should not be at the expense
of the cost of tradition.
And so what tends to happen is if we focus too much on novelty, then we become more and more selfish. But if we gravitate towards tradition, this is where it becomes powerful.
Absolutely.
Thing, because then we focus on otherness, that other people are more important, and you start to see the need to see, how the next person is struggling, or how you can share, and how you can work together. And you see, that's why Africans were not really perturbed or worried by the European invasion when they first came to Africa. Because the focus when the Europeans arrived, the focus of the African leaders or the Africans as such as a culture was others.
Bring him home and make Ubuntu out of him.
Embracing each other. And our traditions back then was already embracing each other. So you don't actually see that the other person is coming with ill intentions.
To it as late. Yeah, exactly. I would have argued that, and I mean, we weren't there and when it happened, but you're absolutely correct. It makes me think at times, seeing the first boat coming through your shores, you wouldn't necessarily think it's out of, to attack. I think you'd be like, oh, what is this? And you're probably welcoming people and welcoming into your village and everything else, only then to be, for the negative to then follow. And I mean, we can spend literally hours on that particular part because really, if humanity were to understand this particular philosophy and we were to live by it, it'd just be amazing. Because even with the self, when you're saying, when you start being in tradition, focusing on that more, you start to just see things beyond yourself, as you mentioned, and literally seeing things. At times I often hold myself back by walking past someone who might be sitting in the street and not even recognizing that they were even there. Like they might as well be part of a wall. But but it's something where in Africa, at least growing up, where I saw this in action, you would know if you had not seen the neighbor down the road for a day, and people would come in and check. The idea, especially the stories that I remember hearing here when I came to Australia, where someone dies in their apartment and then are found 6 months later where because maybe there was a strong smell or something triggered, but they're like way gone. You wouldn't see this if Ubuntu was, because you're always checking on others. You're always making sure you are there.
It's interesting because about maybe 18 months ago, we just started a South African group called South African Community Kopano.
Yes.
So Kopano is a South African or Sotho word meaning a unity. We formed this organization because there was one late Sis Busi Ngubane who passed away under such circumstances.
Oh, sad.
So it really touched our hearts as South Africans. We said, we don't want to see that ever happening to any South African again. And so we formed this organization, formed entirely upon love as a principle. And really, we wanted to ask, we wanted to send this message across that when you see another person, your question should be, I wonder what will happen to that person if I don't help them.
Absolutely.
Rather than, I wonder what will happen to me if I was to help them. And it makes a huge difference, isn't it? So you begin to think about the other person.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the shift that has happened, I feel like times when you come from Africa, coming to migrating here, maybe for economic reasons, is then we then tend, because we're trying to accumulate, we then tend to be on that quadrant of novelty, where we're trying to accumulate, then we end up being selfish because we're just trying to improve ourselves, really. And then, that's where things get lost. But like one of the quotes that I wanted to just read here, because I did mention earlier that I had the favorite definition of Ubuntu that really, I suppose, resonates with me fully and entirety, and I think summarizes, because it's really a philosophy, and you can't sort of really put it in one little sort of statement, but this actually I think does a good job. So Ubuntu therefore can be summarized as a moral quality. Sorry, I apologize. My contacts. A moral quality of a person who holds a view that all humans are interconnected and interdependent. It is a worldview, and a character of a person who respects and values the rights and freedoms of others and finds their identity in the thriving human community. They seek not to exploit others, rather to expand the horizon. Now, if this could just be put on a plaque, on a billboard for all our leaders to just read that each morning they wake up, for people in corporate, corporations and anyone, or even first thing you read is this, and living life through this motto. I just feel like,
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Jackson also went on to say we must invest in institutions and enterprises that promote altruism and cohesive traditions to offset selfishness and novelty that you spoke about.
Yes.
This is what Tim Jackson calls economics that are fit for purpose. Wow. Investment needs to be directed towards protecting our planet and meaningful prosperity. It means investment in shared spaces, people participation, and connected communities. What more could we say? That is just a classic example of Ubuntu. Wow. I am because we are. Yeah. Wow. Well, that winds up our episode today, and I would like to just revert back to where we began about what Kgothatso Dithebe said. And Kgothatso, if you're watching this, just know that there is an open invitation for you on this show.
Yes, please, Kgothatso.
We love what you're doing and what you stand for.
Absolutely.
And this is what you say. So this is a dedication, a little piece of a dedication to you, Kgothatso. In the world where you can become anything, be yourself.
Wow.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Cheers.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in and enjoying the episode with us. We really enjoyed being with you. Please don't forget to subscribe and click a notification button.